in order to give some of the details and things to watch for. The experience in the room far out exceeds any experience I think that any of us have on our own. And hopefully we can take that experience that all of us have, share it with others, and as the TTMAC, one of their guidelines is to share the knowledge and make our industry better. So hopefully we are able to do that today, and then build on what we're learning and what we're talking about. So the program topics, well, how we're going to handle it. Sylvie Dzikewich is our architectural rep, and she's going to be handling determining proper specifications, outlining what we outline in the TTMAC, and then how that relates to manufacturers as to proper products in order to specify. I'll be handling the installation best practices part, and then we're going to have Victor Zeltins. We're going to head all the way to Winnipeg, and he's going to be handling some of the troubleshooting and some of the important details that often get overlooked in either the planning, design, or even in the installation phase, and how we can avoid some of those pitfalls. So I'm going to turn it over to Sylvie now, and she can handle our determining the proper specifications.
Awesome, great, thank you, Brent. These are state-of-the-art projects that offered owners, designers, professionals, manufacturers, and the installers an opportunity to showcase their talents. We've all seen these presented at Hard Surface Awards over the years. At the same time, pool tanks can pose a unique challenge for the team responsible for planning the project. Meaning team, this is the architect, engineer, designer, manufacturer, and also pool consultant. It is also recommended that these projects actually do have a pool consultant on them. These projects are unique and require extra attention to detail. So the sooner everyone's involved, of everybody I just mentioned of the team, the better the outcome. Specifying the right system, sorry, Brent, I guess I have to tell you to.
That's all right.
Awesome, thank you. Specifying the right system for a submerged application is instrumental for a successful installation. These systems are ranging from our surface preparation, the waterproofing, the thin set, and the mortar and grout. The first step for a successful project is understanding the scope of work. As we mentioned, pools and water features can be very complex and can pose unexpected challenges, as I'm sure many of you have come across, especially when trying to deliver a sustainable and innovative project. Next slide. So understanding the scope of work. What we're going to ask here, and what you should be asking yourself when we're beginning the specification of this project, what is the facility? Is it a recreational complex? Is it a stadium? Is it a fitness center, a condo, or is it a hotel? Just pointing out a hotel, often the specification for a hotel gets missed. What's the use of the pool? Is it going to be a leisure pool? Is it a lap pool? Is it an Olympic pool? Is it 5,000 square feet, or is it going to be 40,000 square feet? Next question we ask is, where is it? Is it an interior? Is it exterior, below grade, or suspended? Suspended slabs require more detail. Chlorinated or salt water. A lot of times I'll be working on a project and asking all the questions, and more saltwater pools are coming around these days, and the architect or whoever it is that I'm talking to aren't even aware of that. Like, oh, we didn't realize that. That can change the whole specification with the materials that are being specified. What's the substrate? Is it steel or concrete? What's the turnaround time? Some of these, especially this time of year, we get so many calls for recommendations for aquatic centers. They're fixing up the pools, they're doing up some maintenance right before the kids go back to their summer schedule, which hopefully they will be soon. So is this a fast turnaround project? Is it a fast track project? That again is going to change everything of how we specify it. The tile size. Is it glass, mosaic? Is it suitable for submerged application? Is it suitable for exterior applications? What codes and standards are being met for pool, hot tub, plumbing? This is where your pool consultant definitely will come and play. Materials required for green building guidelines and standards. Please contact, when you're dealing with your manufacturer of choice, this is something that we need to know ahead of time, because again, it's going to determine what we're going to specify. What's the budget? What's the warranty? The warranty sometimes changes the budget, or vice versa. How are we going to maintain this pool? The maintenance, this is key. Some people, I'm dealing with projects and dealing with a consultant, they weren't aware that, oh, we didn't realize there was a maintenance manual we can hand over to the owner once we've completed the project. This is key. And then who will be doing the work of the project? Next slide. The TT Max specification is used as a reference standard. Next slide. So in the specifications, 1.8, quality insurance. In the specification references, company employing qualified personnel skilled in ceramic tile installation. Not only do we want them to be skilled in tile installation, but we want them to be experienced in submerged applications and also with complex projects. Sure, we can have somebody that just built a small pool below grade in a hotel, just your standard pool. But now we're going to be building a state-of-the-art facility, maybe something very similar to what's in the picture right now, where there's a lot of detail. So we want to make sure that they have the experience of these types of applications. And that's where in the specification, remember, these are guidelines that are saying minimum 2 to 5. I would probably recommend a 5-year, leaning more towards the 5-year. And of course, a member in good standing of TT Mac. Next slide. In the specification, it references obtain each specified material from one source. As a manufacturer representative, I can't stress this one enough. Single source prevents failures. We as manufacturers, we test our products as systems. So if we were to be trying to bond to someone else's membrane, we don't know if we're going to bond properly to that. So we want to make sure that we are single sourcing all the products in the system of the pool specification. And also, it'll also be a requirement for the warranty. So depending on what warranty you have, or not depending, sorry, any warranty, if we are to be bonding to another manufacturer's membrane or having somebody else's thin set, it's just a lot of finger pointing, and also it's a requirement for the warranty. Next slide. Always refer to your manufacturer's recommendation. Waterproofing membrane is referenced here with ANSI A118.0. If we are to specify just the ANSI code of 118.10, there are several waterproof membranes that us manufacturers can supply that meets this ANSI standard. There can be anywhere from 3 to 4 membranes, but they may not meet the requirement for that pool. So having more detail in the specification is also key. And I'll get into that a little bit more in the next slide. So bond coat, again, I'm not going to read, we can all read the slides, but the ANSI standard is what I want to point out here again, is the A118.4. This standard, again, as manufacturers, we all have products, and I was just kind of doing some research and just looking at other manufacturers of what products they have that meet that ANSI standard, and it can be anywhere from 15 to 20 products, thin sets that actually meet that. If we only specify the ANSI standard and do not specify the ISO code or the description of the product, they're going to resort to the minimum of that of the system, and then later on come to the project and say, oh, sorry, or it wasn't indicated, and I priced the lowest, the cheapest product, because of course they're going to try to be low, and then find out that it's maybe an exterior pool. So we need to change the product. we want to prevent having extras and extra costs on this job. So providing as much information in the specification is it's going to help prevent that, but also having a description of the product. Us as manufacturers, when we help you with help the consultant, with these specifications, we can provide a 3-part specification. And there's going to list the whole systems, so all the different products, and it's going to have a description in the paragraph for the specification. In that description, it's also going to include the ISO and ANSI standard. This takes all the guesswork out from the consultant or the specification writer, but it's also indicated on most manufacturers' technical data sheet. Including this, what you can do is just remove the word of that manufacturer A, and then just keep the description. At least the description's there and nothing is being missed. Also with epoxies, yes, epoxies are extremely high chemical resistant and offer durability, and we often specify these for interior pools or saltwater pools. However, epoxy grouts are not UV stable and will yellow in time if installed in an exterior pool. Consult with your manufacturer of choice for their recommendation. So to conclude everything I've just said today, pools should not be considered the same. Therefore, products and systems shouldn't either. Brent, you can take it from here.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sylvie. So we're going to move into the best practices for installations of and requirements based from the TTMAC for pools, etc. A lot of these things go across projects, so it's not just necessarily for pools or tanks, but it's very good to zero in on the details because of the complexity of pool installation projects. So standard environmental conditions would apply. Temperatures, nothing below 12 degrees Celsius, nothing above 38 degrees Celsius. Maintain a very clean work environment, and keep in mind that lower temperatures are going to increase set times and cure times for the products being used. Most of these products, in fact, all of these products are very high performance. They have a lot of polymer in them. Very high polymer content products will take extended setting times. So by all means, consult the manufacturer's data, talk to the manufacturer's rep, and by all means maintain the environmental conditions that we are dealing with. A good rule of thumb is if there's water in the tank when you get there, you are either too early or you're too late to get to the installation. So that needs to be rectified on either side in order to start your project. Substrate requirements. Most new pools are already going to be watertight. Most of them are continuous pores. They don't usually have joints in them, and very often they will include a crystalline waterproofing inside the matrix and additive into the concrete. And so they are almost always watertight. Older pools, if you're doing renovation work, that can be a challenge. I would highly recommend an engineer detail any of the joints, etc. Make sure that expandable water stop is being used or needs to be inserted into any of the joint areas to make sure that the pool is watertight. Standard surface profile, CSP of 3, which is a little bit rough, but can be considered not necessarily overly rough. It's quite a smooth surface. Mechanically remove any latents and address the concrete additives, not only the crystalline waterproof. We also see nowadays with green builds, very high fly ash contents in all concrete substrates. Pools are no exception. These can be very, very hard to bond to. The higher the fly ash, the tighter the matrix of the concrete is, the harder it is in order to bond to it. And so for the most part, both new and old pools are probably going to require some sort of mechanical prep in order to reach the requirements and the surface profile requirements. Sandblasting is probably the most common. Grinding is also used in the bottom of the pool. Very often can be shot blasters can be put into the bottom of the pool. In some pools, and usually in smaller pools, you are probably only having to do a very slight leveling coat. You're just having to, say, smooth out the walls, maybe smooth out the floors a little bit in order to get a smooth surface to bond to. Make sure, again, that you plan for cure times for whatever leveling coat you're using. A lot of times we're just using tile mortar. Other times you may be having to go to a little bit more extensive screed mortar in order to do that. But plan for that, especially on the deck. Very often, no matter what the pool is, we are having to rework the deck in order to get it to drain down into whatever the drain details are. So keep that in mind in the planning stages, in the bidding stages, that there's probably going to be some sort of surface prep needed in order to, or even before you start any of the setting materials. Substrates requirements. I'm not sure, wasn't able to look through participants, but I'm pretty sure that any GCs that are on the call just rolled their eyes again. Every time they deal with floor guys, we demand a surface variation. For pool surfaces, that variation should not exceed 6 millimeters in 3 meters or 1/4 inch in 10 feet. And very often we are being asked for even tighter controls even than that. Yes, we can roll mosaic tile over the Rocky Mountains and you can make it look okay, but in pool situations, if you want to get the best job and avoid bird baths, say on the deck, we definitely need a surface variation and a very tight profile on the surface. So surface variation, if you're dealing in very large pools, this will make a big difference. So this is critical in surface variation on large pools. If you can imagine trying to put the lines of a pool over a very wavy substrate, it's very, very difficult to maintain the lines and keep them straight. Infinity edge pools, the tolerance for an infinity edge is going to be even tighter. And we see this in just about all of the bigger pools now are infinity edge. And the tolerance there is 3 millimeters around the perimeter of the pool. These types of standards are very, very difficult. And in fact, they're almost impossible for a concrete guy to get in order to do a concrete pour. So you're going to have to use some sort of filling material in order to straighten out and meet these variances prior to the pool beginning. In some instances, if it's a competition pool, you're going to not only have to meet those requirements in the bottom of the pool, you're also going to have to meet the same requirements on the sides of the pool. The walls in competition pools are absolutely critical. Lane 6 cannot be any longer than lane 1 when you're dealing with hundreds of seconds in races. And if you're dealing with a FINA pool, an International Swimming Federation pool, they have very, very strict requirements in order to ensure fair competition amongst venues. And so by all means, make sure at the design stage and the estimating stage that we know what the requirements are for finishing off and installing, or before we install. This is a critical step. Almost always, this scope of work falls on the tile contract. Unlike other projects where we may be okay with the GC doing all of the surface prep and bringing it up to the requirements that we are asking for, usually the tile guy wants to be able to control the surface prep of doing pools. In order to do that, we need screed mortars for the floors, and we're going to need vertical repair mortars if we have to do anything to the walls. Basically, a screed mortar or a vertical repair mortar, these are just engineered mud beds. We're all very, very familiar with mud bed. They've been around forever. These are engineered versions of the very same thing to make them, allow them to go vertical, or to allow them easy screeding, sloping, etc., and stand up to the performance that's required in a swimming pool. The challenge that we have for these types of products is the surface profile. So we've already talked about surface profile of 3 for a concrete surface in a pool. That is excellent for membranes. It's excellent for adhesives and tile mortars. We understand that. All those products are built in order to bond and stick. They're not built to build up necessarily, but they are built with bonding characteristics, so they can get very high bond strengths over a relatively smooth surface of CSP of 3. Screed mortars are not built necessarily to stick. Screed mortars are meant and built in order to support. So they have much larger aggregates in them. In order to make up for that, for their lack of being able to stick, what we as manufacturers will require, and in fact, the industry will require a higher profile concrete in order to apply these products. We've already discussed, it's very difficult to get heavier products in, or heavier machinery in rather, in order to make a higher profile. And so what do we have to do? Well, if you take the screed mortar, when you put it down, you'll notice that even though it's touching the concrete surface, there are a number of voids underneath. In order to fill those voids and maximize the bond, we have to not only have a chemical bond, we also need a mechanical bond. This is very important because the mechanical bond that the chemical bond that manufacturers are going to ask for is going to be either a high performance mortar, so a high performance tile mortar, similar to what you're sticking the tile down with, or it could also be an epoxy. Why that's important is because that can add cost to the project that may have been overlooked in the estimating stage. So it's necessary at that stage in order to ensure and contact manufacturers, contact the design, and make sure that you are allowing for either a screed mortar and proper thicknesses of the screed mortar, and also to the bond coat is allowed in there in order to eliminate any unnecessary surprises that may come from having to do the prep work on the pool. Once we've got the prep work done, now we can install the waterproofing. We already know that the tank is watertight, so why do I have to use waterproofing? In theory, we don't. If you've ever renovated a really old pool, you may find that they may not have used a waterproof membrane on them. They may not have had waterproof membranes if it's an old enough pool. However, nowadays accepted practice is for the belt and suspenders approach. We all know that concrete will crack, and so to have a belt and suspenders is the liquid applied or a trowel applied membrane. So liquid applied is exactly what it says. It's a liquid. We put it on the wall. It's set to specific specifications. It can be sprayed. It can also be rolled. I will tell you from experience, spraying is probably the best way to apply these products. It's very quick, and also too, the bond that is achieved can be substantial as you're actually driving the membrane into the pores of the substrate, and so your bond strengths will be enhanced using spraying. Not an absolute essential. They still can be rolled. Trowel applied are exactly what you may think. They are applied with a trowel. Typically, these are bag and bottle products. So it's a bag of highly engineered mortar and liquid latex. They're mixed together in order to create the waterproof membrane. What's important to remember with the waterproof membrane is this point right here. So when these products are delivered to site, they are not waterproof membranes. They're just liquid in a pail, or they're a bag and a bottle. Typically, the receptacle that they are delivered in is probably more watertight than they are at that stage. They are the ingredients to create a waterproof membrane. However, they need to be applied in order to turn into a waterproof membrane. There's a certain amount of trust that has to be built between manufacturer and applicator at this point. The applicator has to trust that the ingredients that have been put into the pail are exactly as stated, and the manufacturer has to trust that the applicator is going to follow all of the guidelines and necessary steps that they require in order to turn these products into a waterproof membrane. The owner trusts that both of us are going to do our jobs correctly, and so it's essential that the two of us work together. They need to be a controlled environment, maintain wet film thicknesses, so have a thickness gauge when you're there. Most of these will incorporate mesh or fabric. The nice thing about the mesh or the fabric is they will also control the mill thickness. And so if you are incorporating the mesh and fabric in, if that's what the manufacturer requires, typically once you've done that, put on the second or third coat, you will have proper mill thickness. But by all means, work very, very closely at this point with your manufacturer's technical team and also to the consultant in order to make sure that changes of plane, corners, mill thickness, pipe protrusions, etc., all of these are detailed properly in order to achieve a waterproof membrane in the entire area of the pool. After we've done that, now is the time for the immersion test. So the GC may already have done an immersion test on the pool. They may have checked it prior to you ever getting there. This is a really good time to check the integrity of the pool for the last time. Once the pool or the tile is installed and the pool is filled, these types of tests can be very costly if they show up with a leak. So a good time to do the immersion test, and what's usually required by manufacturers and TTMAC, is to do the immersion test after the waterproofing and prior to the tile being done. Check with local codes as to pool filling, but you will find that all manufacturers and TTMAC, they will recommend it being done in not to exceed 75 centimeters, 30 inches, over a 24-hour time frame. Leave the water in the pool. We recommend, TTMAC recommends at least 5 days. There are different ways to measure the drop, so account for evaporation, obviously, and then it can either be measured using the bucket test, it can be measured using, just lost my ruler, a yardstick, etc. It all depends on the GC as to how they want to do this. This is not part of the scope of the tile installer. This is definitely the scope of the GC, but we can definitely guide them along in order to how to do it and accomplish the immersion test properly. After that, drain the pool and move on to installing the tile. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on tile installation. Most of us on the call know exactly how to do tile installations. We will require, it'll be a single component or a 2-component. If it's a 2-component, the manufacturers will recommend using all of the second part, not mixing it with water, but using it as supplied in order to accomplish and make up the mortar properly. Proper notch trowel, make sure you have 95%. 100% is awesome, but not always achievable, but keep checking that we're getting a minimum of 95% coverage to the back of the tile. In normal installations, we're going to ask for around 80% in the TTMAC. For tile installations and high profile installations, we ask for 95%. Remove excess mortar from the tile joint. This can either be done during the installation stage. Very often it's done after the thin set sets. Guys go back and start scraping out the lines. This is very, very important in order to make sure that you have 2/3 of the tile depth available. It can be a challenge because when you're dealing with mosaics, you deal with a lot of grout lines. And so it can be a challenge to get it done, but it does need to be done properly in order to ensure that the grouting, which comes next, is going to be done properly as well. So tile grout, Sylvie touched on it. Sometimes it's going to be a cement grout. Very often though, it's going to be an epoxy grout. Doesn't matter which one it is. The installation is similar in that we want to force the grout into the joints. You want to get rid of any air bubbles. You want them well compacted. You don't want any gaps. And as manufacturers, this is the one we get the most when we're dealing with epoxy grout. The first steps are usually done very, very well. Typically, it's the cleaning with an epoxy grout. Make sure that it's cleaned properly. Talk to your manufacturer rep, talk to the technical services department that they have, talk to experienced installers. There's different ways in order to do proper epoxy cleans. And some of them are very easy and will go a long way into making the installation a lot easier for ourselves at the grouting stage. Movement joints for tile installations is the same for a pool as it is for most other installations. The location and type of expansion joint, this is the responsibility of the consultant. So they need to spec where they want the expansion joints. They can use soft joint, or they can also use prefabricated movement joints. In very critical installations, it might be hard to use the prefabricated because it's hard to roll them over undulating surfaces. So most times in pool applications, we're seeing them go to a cold applied or a multi-component sealant. Talk to the manufacturer to make sure that it is intended for pool use. Not all of them are, and so you want to make sure that you're getting the proper one. Sometimes a silicone may be suggested or used. Keep in mind that if a silicone is used, it's probably going to be part of a maintenance program. They tend to break down over time, and so you may want to go up to polyurethane or urethane if it's a larger type pool. You can see from the picture where the movement joints, the grout has just been left out, and then these movement joints are going to be filled in with a proper sealant. It'll be done in the field on 8 to 12 foot centers, depending on where the consultant has placed them. And then it's going to be also done in all of the changes of plane as well. So any of the corners, either in the walls or where floor meets wall, is where you're going to put them. If you're doing a renovation or an older tank or a tank with joints in it, the movement joints are going to be put over top of wherever those joints are. So that kind of ties up all of the installation practices and best practices, etc. And I'm going to turn it back to Victor Zeltins, and he's going to be touching on some of the important details that may or may not get overlooked in an installation of a pool.
Wow, that stuff looks great. All that great work on the specification stuff. Brent covered a lot of stuff that I'm just going to go through. For me, it's when the tire meets the concrete or the rubber meets the road that I get involved. I get a lot involved with inspections. I don't call them inspections, I call them observations to help the contractor, the specifier, to make sure that the details are followed. I'm going to go over quickly each step that I suggest strongly that the consultant and the manufacturer's recommendation of the product are there for. The number one, the surface preparation. Number two, surface repair, what we're going to specify. The waterproofing, what I've seen works and what doesn't work. Tile setting, Brent has covered a lot of this stuff. I'll just reiterate. Grouting and tank filling, and then just some suggestions that we make sure that these very sensitive installations go well. So I'll start with the concrete tank, okay? through the past 25 years I've been with Mapei, we've experienced some issues with concrete tanks that haven't been prepped properly, meaning not sandblasted. New concrete construction usually has a latence, or obviously the bleed water comes to the surface of the concrete, and we have a less than ideal bond line for our mortars or our waterproofings to penetrate. So we try to recommend sandblasting, which is ideal, which you saw in the pictures, the spraying of the waterproofing membrane is ideal. When we get into older tanks, we're obviously moving tile, and a lot of times we find out that we have on older concrete pools, we have sand cement bond mortar put onto the smooth concrete. So then when we start doing our demolitions, we find we don't have a very good bond line to that existing mortar that they've put on there. Many years ago, it was simply sand and cement, no profile to the concrete that the tank was done with, so we don't have profile. So our bond line is very weak, okay? So at that point, and another good thing with the demolition is you're going to expose any cracks in the structure that may be an issue with infiltration of water. So at that point, we may need to look at with the consultant, how do we address these cracks in the tank? Do we do an epoxy injection? Do we use hydrophilic resins to inject? A lot of the secondary waterproofing with the fabric is going to address minor hairline cracks, but if we don't, where are you going, Brent?
Okay.
Back it up, back it up, back it up. So if we don't address these at the time, exposing the old concrete tank is very crucial. Sometimes it doesn't happen, and that's when we find that we're getting delamination of the existing parging coat that may have been put on there. Like I said, crack repair of the tank should be addressed at this time. A lot of times you don't know what you're going to get until you do your initial demolition of removing the tile. You may find that you're pulling off, like I said, a 2-inch thick rendering coat. Okay, so we can get a good visual inspection of the tank, and at that point, and like I said, it's so important for us to be as manufacturers and consultants looking at each stage of this installation to make sure with the contractor, with the tile contractor, that we all understand where we're at. Sometimes we can't specify these issues, things pop up, but if we're all there to address it, we can explain to the owners and understand that these are some issues that are unforeseen until we open up everything, which is important, okay? So we understand that in certain applications, when we're dealing with new pools, when we create either a sandblasted or properly prepared surface by grinding can be a bit of an issue because on older tanks, grinding will just drive the powder from the latents into the pores. So if you're just using a grinder, you may have to pressure wash thereafter. So these are things I've seen over the years that make failures or non-failures work. So we talk about CSP3 for the waterproofing. If you have to do, you'll notice in the specifications when we say, gee, we have 2 inches of wall rendering, 1 inch on the floor, you're going to find that that CSP3 may not be an adequate profile for the restoration or rendering of the floors and walls. So you may see a CSP5. So we have to be cognizant of that when we start doing our wall repair mortars. Brent did mention that tile thin sets can be used for minor skim coating. They are not heavy build. I've often gone to a job site where their tile contractors are trying to use 2 inches of tile thin set to repair a wall. Tile thin sets are cementitious adhesives. They are not concrete restoration products, and they're okay for skimming, but the proper restoration products should be used when you start and get anything more than 3/8 or a 1/2 inch deep. So it's very important to make sure that when you go to the job, the guy's not coating the floors and the walls with 2 inches of tile cement. It's not the right way to do it. So those are just the preparation products. The wall rendering is important. The profile is important. The right products are very important so that we don't have that water pressure moving back and forth in the pool. Can cause major issues if we don't have a good bond to the initial substrate. Okay, so that covers the tank. Waterproofing, there's numerous types of waterproofing that can be used. a lot of the projects now are going to the single components. I've noticed that if you've got a spray tank, or the sandblasted tank, and you spray apply your materials, like Brent said, very good penetration. That doesn't mean that you can't use a roll-on method. If you're working exterior, most manufacturers will, depending on the climate you're in, like we're talking about people here from east to west. In my prairie part of the world, we use a cementitious fibered waterproofing membrane, because if you look at most specifications on liquid applied, they have a very, they don't have a high resistance to low temperature, so they can become very brittle. So there are restrictions on using single component waterproofing membranes for exterior pools. So be aware of that. Cementitious ones are probably better for exterior applications. The fiber part of it is excellent, like Brent said. The thing with spraying or rolling material on, you're really at a challenge with the contractor to put the right thickness on. We have the mill gauges. We go out there when they're applying this, again, on site for each stage of these applications. The mill thicknesses are critical with liquid applied. They save time. I can tell you, we waterproofed a tank in 2 days that would have taken, with a spray application, would have taken the guys a week and a half with the trowel application. Not to say that one's better than the other, but definitely a time saving with roll applied membranes. Wet mill thickness should be is important. Using the fabric ensures a proper thickness, and it also reinforces any hairline cracks you may have in the concrete tank itself. When we get back into water testing, flood testing is really the most important part of finding out whether your contractor has done all the details. Next slide, Brent. Immersion test fill. Like I say, once again, we're filling it as per TTMAC, right? Water has a lot of weight to it, so we want to make sure we fill the pool gradually, just like we would if we were filling the pool, period, okay? Flood testing is so important. This will confirm if the general contractor, which usually does the concrete restoration part, meaning if we're putting new drains in an old pool, new jets, all that kind of stuff, if he's done it per spec, we're going to fill that pool and see where the issues are. Okay, next slide. When we do the flood test, it's the best part of making sure that this whole installation is going to go well. This is just a water test was done. This is just an attachment for a rope to go across the pool, but it's leaking. Upon further inspection, we saw that the detail around that was not done quite as well as it should have been. I mean, that's why the water test is so important on these applications. So main issues, like I said, with these are the details. It's not, you're not going to find a waterproofing issue within the membrane, but you're going to find it around every penetration in the pool, whether it's a drain or a light, an inlet port, outlet port. These are all where the common problems are found. This is kind of where you know whether the contract is kind of cut something off or done something a little bit different. Next slide, please. You can see we're dealing with the crack repair on this one, depending on what we have to do, what type of rendering products. Once the tank is clean, we can figure out how thick we need it. If it's a competition pool, just a leisure pool. Leisure pools aren't as sensitive to the width of the pool. We may not have to put that rendering coat to make it a competition pool. Next slide. So you can see here, details are very important, and then this is one of the biggest frustrations. The picture on the right was an issue with the pool that we did a flood test, and every one of those drains, 24 of them leaked. Met with the consultant, the engineer, general contractor was responsible for doing the drains properly. They put them in, I won't say fudged them, but not quite properly. We all met on site and the drains had to be redone. So this is where it's so important to make sure your contractor's following the details. In this case, they didn't, and it was very costly to the contractor to repair. and replace all the drains, meaning take them out, reset them with the proper system. Lights are very sensitive to leakage too. Like Brent said, silicones, they have probably a life expectancy of 5 years. So we definitely have to have some sort of maintenance program in there. So, and the sealant is important. Certain plain silicones aren't exactly what you need. Polysulfides, polyurethanes, 2-component can be determined at the time. We'll get into tile setting. Like Brent said, and like Sylvie said, there's a lot of different products that have that ANSI 118 specification. There's a lot of them available, but few are approved. If you consult and specify products specifically, like more closely to being specific are the ISO specifications. We have to consider the type of mortar, type of water, interior, exterior, to make sure that we have the proper interior pools. There's lots of new single component mortars. Salt waters, they're usually a strong specification for epoxies to deal with salt water pools. Another key is 100% coverage, like Brent said. They're not, once again, I'm saying they're not the right product to do rendering of walls at deeper thicknesses, but more than 1/2 inch, you should really be going into a conquer repair type of product. So we see failures in pools usually where we don't have full transfer, or we have incorrect mortars, or some details of the around the lights, the deck faces. Strips have to be properly and accurately placed to avoid any water penetration. All these penetrations are where we usually see failures. So let's talk about grout quickly. Grouting, you'll find that there's like, you can see the details here. On the right also, we have a trench detail. Trenches can be waterproofed, but they're not designed. Waterproofing, secondary waterproofing membranes are not exposed. I mean, you cannot leave that, say, oh, gee, we waterproof the trench. It needs to be addressed with some sort of tile. If you can't put a tile in it, then we have to go back to the drawing board and find a waterproof mortar that can be used in that trench. So it goes back to design. Pool tank filling. One of the things we have to be careful with is when we start to fill with water. Also, bond testing is sometimes, in this slide, you'll see we're doing bond tests. These bond tests are done to evaluate the bond of the resurfacing mortars we've used, the wall rendering and floor rendering. I can assure you that you need to have a quality consultant do the pull tests. This particular picture, we had a consultant that was maybe the brother-in-law of the contractor that did some Mickey Mouse pull tests. They failed. We contested them and brought in a different party, and we found that the bond of our product meet the standards that the engineer put forward. So once again, we're at the site. You can see on the right, a pull test, when done properly, ruptured the concrete as opposed to the bond of the rendering mortars. Pipe penetrations going through walls, they have to be done correctly. If not, they leak. So those are some of the little intricacies. And like I said, every step of the way, it's important to be on them. And then consult with everybody. The manufacturer of these products is not necessarily the design person or the engineer. They're observation people that help the consultant make sure that these products are done properly and every step of the way is done right, so that we have a smooth, usually problem-free installation. So the TTMAC recommendations, we follow them, we don't make them up. ISO is very good. It's more specific than the ANSI codes. We like to go by those because then we can refine what we're using in swimming pools. So we want to specify the right products. We don't want to just specify a code that can be taken from mud to gold. So it's very important that we follow that. Important thing too, ensure the contractor and subcontractor are experienced in pool installations. I had a guy said, we have 20 years of experience. He had 20 guys on site, so it kind of gave me an add up. It was like 1 year per guy. It's more important that we find out pools that have been done, where they've been done and when they've been done. We want to see something that's 5 years old as opposed to being just recently done. So it's very important to be working with a good crew, a crew that has respect for the manufacturer and works with architects and engineers. Many of the people there's a handful of contractors I know that do pools. They always help the consultant and the general contractor make sure these things look beautiful. So stick to a single manufacturer of products. Single source warranty is critical. There may be certain, like a sealant or a tile trim that a specific manufacturer doesn't have. One small additive here or there when consulted with are fine, but usually stick with the main plan, with the main guys that have been doing this for a long time, and these pools will go well. So I want to thank Brent. I want to thank Sylvie. Did a great job on that. I'm just following up on where the brakes have to be put on in case you have troubles.
Thank you, Victor.
All right.
So I guess, Lisa, we can turn it over to if anyone has any questions, or if everyone is needing a lunch break or whatever. So
we did have a couple of questions
Okay.
from Ted. He asked, any thoughts on mechanical control joints versus soft sealant control joints?
My thought would be mechanical ones are a little bit harder to install over, as I said, undulating surfaces. So maybe on the pool deck, it might be okay, but typically in the pool tank, you're going to see that guys are going to be using the soft joints just because of all the details, etc. And like I said, various changes of plane grades, etc. for that. But it's all up to the designer, the consultant, and the installer as well, in order to decide which one is going to work the best for that application.
I can just say through experience, when you have those slopes going down into the deep end of the pool and that, very challenging to get a rigid pre-conformed joint to conform to the substrates.
Yeah.
So, like Brent said, flat work, it's great. Pool tanks, it's a challenge.
Okay, we have another question. Clarity on NC 118.10 membrane and moisture testing without HVAC, etc. Interiors versus exteriors. It was said that these membranes are not always needed.
So for clarity, 118.10 covers an awful lot of the different manufacturers' membranes. I'll just use an example. I think there's 5 that are made by Mapei, but only about 2 of them are we ever going to recommend into a pool use. A lot of them were built for smaller areas, showers, that type of thing. So that application, although the standard goes across all of the membranes, there's only a few. So you're going, when specifying, it's critical that you not just specify that specification, but also to name the product or manufacturer in order to get the applicable membrane for waterproofing. Whether or not they're needed, industry standard now is, yes, they are used in pool tanks. As I said, years and years ago, and I'm going back to probably 20 or 30 years, if you're doing a renovation, you may find that the pool tank was not waterproof, that they just went with it. But as a belt and suspenders approach, standard industry practice now, and the recommendation in the TTMAC is that a waterproof membrane meeting 118.10 be used in pool tank applications.
All right, another question. Does the tile trade do the sandblasting?
Not always. Yeah, go ahead, Victor.
General contractor usually has contacts.
Yeah.
He may refer to the tile contractor that has experience and has an affiliate that they work with when they do preparation on concrete for tanks. So the GC may go to the tile guy and say, hey, do you have a guy that does sandblasting? So the performance or what they've done is then reviewed by the specifier or the consultant and conferred with the manufacturer of the product. So could be either or. Could be you shake my hand, I shake yours kind of thing. There's a lot of that. The guys that do really good work on pools, there's usually a three-way party with GCs, demolition guys, and pool contractors, and they usually work a tight number and they're well respected. So there's only a handful in each area, I know. So
Got some more questions coming in here. Best practice for tie-in with water features and mechanical items that don't have good tie-ins.
Can you repeat that, Lisa?
Yeah. Best practice for tie-in with water features and mechanical items that don't have good tie-ins.
Brent, I think what they're talking about is like when you, in a water feature, fountains and whatnot, you've got an upstand pipe that's coming in, or electrical system that is basically protruding out of the floor. Or in a pool around the light or electrical outlets.
Okay. Typically, those are going to be detailed by the design team and or manufacturer of those products. A lot of times the tile installer gets called on to do that, but those details should actually be done by the or at least reviewed by the consultant. A lot of the products that the tile installers are working with are familiar to them, but a lot of the detail work going around those types of pipe penetrations and that should be done by others. They may be able to accomplish the work, but how to actually do it should be detailed. There are, for drain penetrations, etc., there are details in the TTMAC, but I don't know that the TTMAC will cover the actual penetrations themselves, so that should be done by the design team.
Well, you guys, we've got lots of questions here. Hang on. In the event the immersion test indicates there is a leak, is the next step to perform a dye test similar to a smoke pen test to track down the leak location, or is there a better method to locate them?
I would say the dye test is probably the most efficient. A lot of the tanks you can actually go down underneath. So a lot of them, the mechanical rooms and mechanical makeup is underneath. So you may get an indicator from there where the leak is coming from. But that being said, you may have a leak at one end of the pool that is not displaying until the other end of the pool when you go down underneath. So definitely a dye test would be probably your best bet. Again, that type of work not done by the tile installers are covered in the TTMAC for that. But
okay, standards call for dot mounted mosaics and paper face mosaics. If the manufacturer stands behind their mesh back mosaics, can these still be used in a pool?
If the manufacturer is recommending them for pool installation, I believe they can be, but be very, very careful that the manufacturer is actually specifying those. A lot of times they are just dot mounted, but that being said, we were on a pool recently where we tore off old tile and it was paper mounted. It'd been there for probably 20 years. So yeah.
What project was mentioned to use in between the concrete substrate and the mortar bed?
Concrete substrate and mortar bed.
I think they're the bonding
agent. So the bonding agent is going to vary, A, with product, B, with manufacturer. So, and also with the performance of the system that's required. So very often, because the setting or the repair mortars are not, very often they require a very high profile. Victor said 5, but a lot of them go up 7 to 9 we can't actually get that type of profile in a pool. So we will require a bond coat. A lot of the installers on the call or contractors will understand a lot of times we use tile mortar and then stick down the mud bed. So we'll use a 4-to-1 mud bed and they'll use a tile mortar to do that. as the bond coat. Very, very similar in principle to that. You're just using different products, and typically a higher end type product. It can be a tile mortar. Very similar. It'll probably be the same mortar that you're using to set the tile with, or it can actually be an epoxy. So it all depends on the system that's being recommended, either from the manufacturer or the specifier, as to what the bond coat will be. But keep in mind that there will be a bond coat in between. It'll just depend on the product.
Okay. I think I caught all the questions. If I missed one, let me know.
Yeah, Vincent had a
Oh, there's one. Yep. Sorry, I missed that. Should contractors be pre-qualified before allowed to bid?
It's a best practice, but sometimes the owners look at prices and they don't. I mean, the consultant should strongly recommend it to the owner, but at the end of the day, it's got to be what the owner accepts as qualified, and say, we will put it in our specification. And like I said, having done X number of pools, you can put a list on it, 5, where they were done, how long ago they were done. You get an idea of who's a good guy. Similar here, I had one where we did a specification and the cost to redo the tile was $250,000. Somebody found a brother-in-law that did it for a fraction of the cost, but it came in with no warranty. So I mean, it's hard to dictate when to be done right. There's quality people, and then the owner has to decide whether he wants to pay the price or accept the no warranty application.
What there's a little bit can go on is if 2 or 3 companies that are qualified are asked to bid the job, and then there's a unqualified that's in the mix. I think it should be put back to the GC to say why is an unqualified person being asked to bid. And if they give it all a pushback, they just want the cheapest price on something as vital as a water feature or a pool, it might be worth just walking away and saying, yeah, go for the cheapest price. And then you probably end up calling one of us back to come and do the repairs.
Totally agree on that one. It's when somebody's 25% low, there's steps being not done. So that should be a red light. So.
Sorry, I'd like to make a comment on that. It's Brent Fisher with Fisher Marble and Tile.
Yep.
We've been fighting off a guy here in our market for, oh gosh, probably somewhere between 5 and 7 years. He's a guy that I won't mention his name, but he operates out of Fernie, BC, and he's not even an Alberta-based company. But he's always got the hot number on the pools. And so the last 3 leisure centers that were City of Calgary projects, keep in mind, City of Calgary procurement is all about the low number. And and none of the rest of us that have done pools over the years we can't touch the guy. We just absolutely can't touch him. He beats us all by anywhere between 15 and 25%. And we've been brought in recently to go through some of his work, because when it comes time for him to do his warranty work, he doesn't show up, and then they need some work done. And so we end up going in and doing it. But that being said, I'll be willing to bet you that the next pool, when we're waiting on the award, I'll be willing to bet you he gets it.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't seem to be any accountability whatsoever. It's all about the low number. It's about the hot number. The guy doesn't do good work. I'm sure he's cutting corners on the preparation side of the business for sure. They don't even know what kind of problem they have, because these pools are only 5 to 7 years old. Wait till they're 10 to 15 years old. Then they'll really find out what kind of problems that they have. But it's just unbelievable. And it's to the point where with the City of Calgary stuff in particular, I don't bid anymore. I just say, no, there's a lot of work goes into bidding a pool. I just, you give it to that guy. And you deal with them when the failure comes. Yeah.
From the other side of that, from the contractor side, I would want to be qualified. in order to do in order to take this work on.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Risk is huge.
Absolutely, but the problem is because this guy has actually done a handful of these pools, he would probably get through the qualification process, because what they don't know yet, and they will find out, is that they're going to have a problem soon in a lot of these leisure centers.
You get that in industrial flooring as well, so.
Thank
Guys
you,
need to weasel their way out, so.
Thanks everybody for your time today. Thank you to our speakers from Mapei. They were awesome. Thank you for the interaction from all the participants. And we hope to see you at the next Tile Tech Talk.
Awesome.
Great job.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, all.
Hey, can the TT Mac people stay on for just a moment?
Thank you.
Hang on.